Ready to dive into speaking English confidently. Today, we're unlocking some serious gems from Prince's English Unlocked podcast, specifically the episode Speak Fluent English with Confidence. You ever get that feeling like you're trying to speak, but your brain just slams on the brakes?
Oh, absolutely.
Turns out that's a pretty universal experience. Even native English speakers feel that way sometimes.
It's true. And you know what's really interesting? That struggle often has way more to do with what's going on in our own heads than with how tricky English actually is.
Okay, now I'm totally intrigued. What exactly is happening in our brains when we get that stuck feeling?
Well, think about it. When we're learning a new language, especially when we're translating everything in our heads, it's like creating this mental traffic jam.
Oh, I can totally relate to that.
Your brain's trying to do a million things at once, right? Recalling words, figuring out the grammar, constantly switching between languages.
Wow. It's no wonder we feel like we're speaking in slow motion.
Exactly.
And I bet that mental overload just adds to that fear of making mistakes, which Prince talks about too.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we're so worried about messing up that we end up tripping over our words even more.
Yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It really is. That fear response actually activates parts of the brain linked to sensing threats,
Oh, wow.
which makes it even harder to think clearly and access the language we've learned.
So how do we break free from this mental bottleneck and start speaking more confidently? Prince had some really practical advice in his podcast.
You did.
He talks about the power of thinking in English. Any tips on how we can actually train our brains to do that?
Well, the key is to create this mental space where English is your go-to mode of thinking, even for everyday stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of mentally translating your day, try narrating it in English,
Oh, okay.
even if it's just simple sentences at first. Think about what you're doing, what you see, even what you're having for dinner, all in English.
I like that.
This constant exposure helps your brain make those connections with the language.
So it's about building those mental pathways, one thought at a time.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Prince also mentioned talking to yourself as a way to practice.
Oh, yeah?
I've done that, and it always feels a little silly. But is there a way to make that more effective?
Definitely. Talking to yourself is like having a judgment-free zone to experiment with the language.
Okay.
So instead of just describing your day, try explaining a concept out loud, or even having a pretend conversation.
Interesting.
Imagine you're explaining something you're passionate about to a friend. It engages your brain differently and helps you practice structuring those thoughts in English.
That's a great tip. It turns talking to yourself into a more purposeful thing. Another technique Prince recommends is shadowing,
Right?
where you basically mimic a native speaker. Have you found this helpful?
Oh, shadowing is incredibly effective. It helps you develop pronunciation, intonation, even understanding those natural speech patterns.
So how do you make the most of it?
Choose engaging content that you actually enjoy, podcasts, movies, interviews, even TED Talks.
I like that.
It's like a vocal workout, mirroring the speaker's rhythm and flow.
Okay, I love that analogy. Any common pitfalls people should avoid when trying shadowing?
One mistake is choosing stuff that's too difficult or just not interesting enough.
Yeah,
If you're always struggling to keep up or feeling bored, you're not going to stick with it. Start with content that's slightly above your current level, but still enjoyable. And focus on actively listening and mimicking, not just repeating the words.
gotcha.
Pay attention to the speaker's intonation, stress, and pauses. Those are the subtle things that really make your English sound natural.
That's really helpful. It's like turning language practice into a fun listening game.
Exactly. And the more you enjoy it, the more you'll want to keep practicing and getting better.
So we've talked about thinking in English, talking to ourselves, and shadowing, all awesome techniques for improving fluency. But Prince also really stresses the importance of finding a speaking partner.
He does.
He mentions apps like HelloTalk and Tandem, but I'm sure there are other ways to find speaking partners, right?
Oh, tons. There are local meetups, language exchange groups, online forums dedicated to language learning.
So many options.
You just have to get a little creative and find what works best for you.
It's all about getting out there and practicing, even in short bursts, that can do wonders for your confidence and fluency.
For sure. Consistent practice, even in small doses, is key.
And that brings us to another great tip from Prince, focusing on learning phrases, not just isolated words.
So important.
Why is that approach so powerful?
Learning phrases helps you understand how words work together naturally. It makes your speech smoother, more authentic.
So instead of just learning the word important, you might learn the phrase, it's important to note that.
Exactly. It instantly makes your communication more sophisticated.
And you can use those phrases right away, which gives you a nice little confidence boost.
It does, and it helps you sound more like a native speaker.
We've covered some fantastic strategies for improving spoken English, from mental exercises to practical techniques. But Prince is also very real about the fact that making mistakes is just part of the process.
Oh, yeah.
He even outlines some common ones that many learners make. I'll admit, I've been guilty of a few myself, like using the wrong tense, throwing in way too many ums and likes, and sometimes I talk so fast I can barely understand myself.
Those are classic pitfalls, but don't worry, they're totally fixable with a little awareness and practice.
All right, let's break down these common errors and see how we can tackle them. First up, the dreaded tense issue. I think we've all accidentally said something like, I go to the store yesterday and cringed inside.
It happens to the best of us, but it does highlight how important it is to understand how verbs change in different tenses.
Right.
English tenses can be tricky, but with practice and by listening to how native speakers use them, they'll become more natural.
So practice is key, as always. What about those pesky filler words?
Yes, like.
It's like they have a mind of their own.
They often sneak in when we're nervous or searching for the right word.
True.
And while a few fillers here and there are totally normal, overusing them can make you sound less confident.
Okay.
The first step is just being aware of it. Try recording yourself speaking and notice how often you use fillers.
I'll have to try that.
Then practice pausing instead of filling those gaps. It might feel awkward at first, but those pauses actually make you sound more thoughtful.
That's a great tip. Sometimes silence really is golden. And finally, let's tackle that speed demon syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Talking so fast that we trip over our own words. I've definitely been there.
It's understandable. Enthusiasm is great, but clarity is key.
For sure.
When we speak too quickly, we risk not being understood. Focus on enunciating clearly and pausing between phrases. Give your listeners time to process what you're saying.
That's a valuable reminder. Slow and steady wins the fluency race.
It really does.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've looked at why speaking English can feel challenging and explored some practical tips and common mistakes we all make.
And don't go anywhere, because in the next part of our deep dive, we'll dig even deeper in the Prince's podcast. We'll explore his insights on overcoming pronunciation hurdles and keeping a positive mindset on this language learning journey. Welcome back to our deep dive. Before we jump ahead, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, the fear of making mistakes.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
It's a common hurdle and often ties into another big challenge for English learners:
And what's that?
pronunciation.
Oh, pronunciation. That's a whole other level, isn't it? I remember struggling with certain sounds, sounds that didn't even exist in my native language. It felt like my mouth had to learn all these new tricks.
Totally. And Prince actually had some really smart points in his podcast about this. He emphasized that it's not about getting rid of your accent entirely.
That makes sense.
It's more about clarity, making sure people understand you.
I like that approach. Our accents are a part of who we are. It's cool that Prince focuses on being understood rather than sounding exactly like a native speaker.
Right.
But how do we find that balance between embracing our accent and still working on pronunciation?
Well, it starts with being aware of your own pronunciation. Which sounds do you find tricky? Maybe record yourself reading something in English and then listen back.
That's a good idea.
What trips you up? Once you know which sounds are tough, really listen to how native speakers say them.
So it's about training our ears as much as our mouths.
Exactly. And Prince mentioned something that can really help with this: listening to podcasts and watching movies.
That sounds fun.
It's like immersing yourself in the sounds of English. Let your ears get used to the nuances.
I love that. It turns watching movies and listening to podcasts into a learning experience.
It does. And don't forget about mimicking.
Mimicking?
When you hear a native speaker say a word or phrase that's hard for you, try to repeat it. Pay attention to how they shape their mouth, how they position their tongue.
Like a little mouth workout?
You've got it.
Prince also had some really interesting thoughts about mindset in language learning. He
Yes.
said it's a journey, not a destination, which really resonated with me.
It's such a crucial point. It's easy to get discouraged, when we don't see results right away or compare ourselves to others. But language learning is a process.
Right.
It's about embracing the ups and downs and celebrating those little wins along the way.
Absolutely. He also talked about finding joy in the process, which I think is so important.
It is.
If we're enjoying ourselves, we're more likely to stick with it, right?
100%. Make it an adventure. Explore English through music, movies, books, podcasts, whatever interests you.
Yeah.
Turn those study sessions into little trips into the English-speaking world.
I love that. It takes the pressure off and makes language learning fun and exciting instead of a chore.
Right. And those aha moments, when you suddenly understand a new phrase or can express yourself more fluently, those are the best.
They really are. They keep us motivated.
Exactly. And remember, mistakes are going to happen.
Oh, for sure.
They're not failures, though. They're opportunities to learn.
It's so easy to get down on ourselves when we make mistakes, but they're really just stepping stones.
Exactly. Each mistake gets us closer to fluency, so don't be afraid to experiment, to make those mistakes, and to learn from them.
Now, thinking about our listeners who are on their own English-speaking journeys, what's the most important message we can give them today?
I'd say fluency and confidence, they're within your reach. It takes practice, yes, but also embracing the challenges, finding the joy in it all and celebrating your progress along the way.
Beautiful said. And remember, you're not alone on this journey.
Not at all.
There's a whole community of English learners out there, all working towards the same goal. We're in this together.
That's right. So to echo Prince's advice, keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep having fun with it.